guys, I'm back. So as you know, unfortunately, quarantine has negatively impacted a lot of people. But for this video, I did want to look at something good that came out of this whole situation. Or rather, some would say, look at the glass half full. Although, now that I think about it, some would actually argue that the glass is completely full because half of it's water and then the other half of it's air. Then again, other people would argue that's actually mostly empty because there's a lot of space between the individual particles. So it's actually 99%, give or take, mostly empty space. Wait a minute. Where was I going with this? Oh, right. Point being is that I wanted to look at the positive side, or at least one aspect of it. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the quarantine situation is something good overall just because of this one good aspect. I'm simply saying that something good did come of it, and I want to try to look at that for this video. So what is this aspect that I keep referring to? Well, what I'm referring to is that quarantine has given us a chance to see that the Earth lives! It's not dead! Like, this is a weird thing to say, but I was starting to get really concerned the Earth was kind of dead. But because of quarantine, as you may know, we've seen a lot of evidence that the Earth, environmentally speaking, has recovered. Now, before you go down into the comment section yelling about how I'm just a guy who wants us all to go back to the Stone Age for the sake of the environment, no, relax, that's not what I'm saying. I mean, for crying out loud, I'm recording on a computer using a microphone. Quite clearly, I'm not trying to get everybody to just, abandon all technology and civilization. That's, no. Now, what I am talking about is that a lot of people, a lot of whom are very, very smart, were getting really concerned that we were maybe past the point of no return in terms of trying to restore the Earth's environment. And while obviously I can't sit here and tell you everything that's happened is scientific proof that we're not past that point, what I can say is that it does inspire a little bit of hope. Hope that we're really not past that point. Seeing the waters become clearer, seeing animals come back in larger populations, and just seeing pollution overall decrease so dramatically gives us hope that not only are we not past that point, but also that it's feasible to actually restore the environment. Now, no, I'm not saying that we should remain in quarantine just for the sake of trying to restore the environment. That's just stupid. But what I am saying is that restoring the environment is actually something that we as a race can feasibly do. Now, I actually wanted to take this opportunity to kind of address the whole environment conversation. Now, of course, the first thinking is climate change, right? You're probably, if you're not a believer in climate change, there's a good chance that before I even said it, when I started talking about the environment, you were probably thinking about counter arguments for climate change. Well, don't worry, in this video, I'm really not going to talk about it. Now, yes, I do believe that it is a thing, and I do believe that it's an actual concern, but that's not what I'm going to talk about in this video. The reason for that is that I kind of feel that people's main focus on the environmental problems are specifically on climate change for some reason. And that's usually the problem or the argument that everybody who doesn't want to concern themselves or doesn't think that the environmental concerns are a real problem refer to. They'll usually come up with counter arguments for climate change when it's a concern, but it's almost not the biggest concern in terms of pollution. So I'm going to go over those other things. First, actual trash pollution. You might be thinking, well, show me the evidence for trash pollution. Fair enough. There is a giant patch of trash in the ocean 3 times the size of France. Now, obviously you can't go right there right this second because of quarantine, but literally any time prior or any time after quarantine is over, if you don't believe me, you can go get a boat and you can go see it for yourself. You can go and see that it legitimately is that big. And of course, I will have sources in the description below as always, but you don't even necessarily need that. If you're really skeptical, which in all honesty, I do respect. I respect anybody who has a level of skepticism where they'll be like, well, I can't just believe you just because you're telling me it is or isn't true. That's fair enough. That's why I always put information in my descriptions. But even if you don't want to go through that, you can go and physically see that giant trash patch. If you really want to go through the trouble, you can even measure it. That's probably not very practical because, again, like I said, it's 3 times the size of France. But hypothetically, you could. Now, the next problem I want to talk about is air pollution. And I know that because air pollution has everything to do with climate change, you might think I'm about to talk about that. But don't worry, that's not, like I said before, that's not going to be the primary focus. Because air pollution has a lot of negative impacts. And admittedly, some of which are easier to show evidence for than others. This is going to be one of the ones that are a fair bit easier to show evidence for. What I'm talking about is the increase in the acidity of the water. Now, I'm making it sound a lot fancier than it is. It's very, very basic chemistry. Basically, what happens when you combine carbon dioxide with water, that makes carbonic acid, which increases the acidity of water. Now, if animals are tuned to just survive in this relative state of acidity that they're used to, and you instantly increase or decrease it, then chances are they're going to be negatively impacted by it. Now, if you're an astute person, you're probably going to question what I say, which is good. You really shouldn't just believe anything I tell you just because I tell you. But like I said before, this is one of the ones easier to show evidence for. Now again, I will leave evidence for it down in the description below, but this is another one that you can actually run the test for. You can take some carbon dioxide, add it to water, check the pH before and after you add it, and then you will see that the acidity in the water increases after you add it. Now, if you have a healthy dose of skepticism, the other thing you're probably thinking is, well, isn't that just something that naturally occurs in the environment? I mean, animals, generally speaking, will produce carbon dioxide, and plants will generally produce oxygen. That's how the cycles work. And yeah, you're completely correct. But that's when everything's more or less balanced. If there's more carbon dioxide than what the ocean's planktons and the plants can absorb, then that will cause the water to turn acidic, because then there's going to be left over from everything that the plants and plankton can absorb. And keep in mind that we're also having a really big problem with things like deforestation. That's not helping the situation either. And I mean, for crying out loud, there was a fire in the Amazon just a couple months ago, and I think Australia was just on fire. It might still be on fire a little bit. So that's also not helping the situation either. So on top of the fact that we're producing more carbon dioxide than most of the plants can take, we're also having a problem because the number of plants on Earth is really rapidly decreasing. So not only do we have more carbon dioxide than the Earth is prepared for, but the things that are in charge of managing it are decreasing at a concerningly rapid rate. And unfortunately, those are not the only 2 problems that plague the environment. I mean, I could probably be here for like an hour at least talking about the different problems. I mean, I haven't even gotten to the pollution on land, light pollution, which admittedly isn't as harmful as it sounds, but still has significant environmental effects. We could be talking about how when we eat seafood, we tend to just throw away the shells when really we should be throwing it back into the original environment so it can be reabsorbed by that environment. So again, we can be here for a while going over all the environmental problems that is not climate change. But what I'm saying here is that thanks to quarantine, we see that it's not impossible. It's something that's very feasible for us to do. Now I'm going to repeat this. No, I am not saying that we need to go back into the Stone Age, and no, I am not saying that we need to stay in quarantine for the rest of our lives. That would be dumb. But what I am saying is that switching over to a method that's equally, if not more efficient and is better for the environment is something very feasible. And not only that, just making minor changes can have a drastic difference. And I'm not necessarily talking about just the, well, I'm going to walk to work instead of drive there, which, don't get me wrong, is good. And also, I mean, let's face it, we all need more walking, just generally speaking. But that's not just what I'm talking about. I'm talking about minor changes on a larger scale, if that makes sense. For instance, I mentioned that a lot of times we eat, say, seafood that have shells, and we throw away the shells. And the bad thing is that those shells should be decomposed and eaten away by other fish and microorganisms. So not returning those remains to the original environment can have a negative impact. So simply having a system where we have the shells and other remains sent back to the environment can make a world of difference. Maybe just have it so that whoever brings the fish or crustacean or whatever to the restaurant on his way back to collect more, just have him bring the shells and have him dump them into the ocean or wherever it came from. And that would make a huge difference. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, I know it's far more complicated than that. The logistics of the weight that it takes and the amount of energy that it takes to actually get the shells back, and there's a whole series of things that would obviously have to be figured out for that kind of system. But point is, making changes like that can be very beneficial. And I mean, Costa Rica was able to run primarily on renewable resources for 100 days. And that was a couple years ago. I want to say 3 years ago. I might be a little bit off, but a couple years ago. So if an entire country, albeit rather small, can run primarily on renewable resources for 100 days, I'm thinking we can probably do a lot better with renewable resources just around the world. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm well aware that renewable resource technology isn't quite at the point where it can completely replace fossil fuels. But again, if an entire country can run on it for about 100 days, I would think a good portion of the fossil fuels the world in general just relies on can probably be switched over to renewable resources. Now, like I said, again, not all of it, but a good chunk of it would really help. But again, bottom line that I'm trying to get through here is that thanks to the quarantine that happened, as bad as it is, at least there's one good thing that we can get out of it, and it's that the situation just around us is slightly improving. And that's good, and I'm hoping that thinking about that will help ease some of the stress that people are having because of quarantine. But look, bottom line of this video, what I'm really trying to get across is that because of quarantine, we're able to see that this good thing is possible. And I know that everybody's like super stressed and like growing stir crazy because of quarantine. So I'm really hoping that me talking about this unexpected good side effect can at least help ease some of the stress that people are feeling and remind them that, not the entire world is evil or destined for doom. Because that's kind of what I think a lot of us are feeling. So I just kind of wanted to remind you that not everything's going terribly. A lot of things are, and I'm really hoping we can get those things sorted out as soon as possible, because I know a lot of people are suffering because of it. I just hope, again, that trying to bring one good thing into this, it can at least help you mentally. Well, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any other ideas on things I can make videos about, any other comments on the environment, stuff like that, make sure to leave it in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell button. I post every other weekend. Until then, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye, guys.